Shri Gurubhyo Namah Harihi Om. Dhyayamo dhavalavagunthanavatim tejomayim naishtikim snigdhapangavilokinim bhagavatim mandasmitashrimukhim vatsalyamritavarshinim sumadhuram sankirtanalapinim Syamangim madhusiktasuktim Amrita anandatmikam Ishwarim. Om Amriteshwaryai Namah. Om Amriteshwaryai Namah. Om Amriteshwaryai Namah. Om Amriteshwaryai Namah. Let's continue with our discussion on Bhaja Govindam. So far, we have discussed the first 17 verses. So let's recap all the points that or the gist of every verse that we have discussed till now, and then move on to the 18th verse today. So, the first verse is about so-called technicalities of life, the complications that we bring in life and try to live up to it, try to recognize that and go beyond that. The first one. Second one is about greed, about the tendency to accumulate wealth. Try to understand it's meaningless. Third one is about bodily attraction, the significance that we give to the physical appearance. Go beyond that, because beauty is much, much more beyond that. Fourth one, about unpredictability of life and ever to remain prepared for whatever life has in stock for us. Fifth one, relationship with people, and as long as we have wealth and as long as we have abilities, we are going to have following, we are going to have people around us. And as that depletes, even the following depletes. Sixth one, as long as there is life in this body, people will remember us. And as long as it goes, it's very natural that we'll also wean out of people's memory. The seventh one was about how in different stages of life, we are obsessed with so many different things, wherein we don't have time to be focused on what needs to be focused on. So the seventh verse reminds us of that. Eighth verse is about relationship, kind of summarizing it, and finally bringing us to the question, who am I? Finally, who am I actually, with all these definitions that I have about myself? Am I really that, or am I something beyond that? Ninth verse. So now that we have started asking the question, who am I? The question is the journey. How do we go about our journey of spiritual growth? So we begin with good company. The first point, through good company, we develop detachment. Through detachment, we overcome delusion. And through that is how we could make life meaningful. So ninth verse was about that. The 10th verse was about the various things that we obsess about, we consider significant in one point of time in our life. Definitely at some other point of time, later point of time in life, it's no more going to remain significant. And we'll realize it much later, oh, I wasted my time on this unnecessarily. So the 10th verse is reminding us of that. The 11th verse then continues, if it is so insignificant, it's not really significant, what is the point in taking false pride in that? So let go of garva, let go of pride is what? Don't take unnecessary pride is what 11th verse pointed out to us. The 12th one tells us about how life gives us dual experiences, good, bad experience. Pleasant experience, unpleasant experience. When would we be successful in life? When we are able to deal with either of these experiences, not getting pulled away by the emotions of these experiences. The 13th verse was about how good company alone will take us across the ocean of the complication of life. And we discussed, in this case, good company specifically in context of company with a Sadguru, the best company rather. The 14th verse was about how the outwardly show off in terms of growing spiritually is meaningless. The actual change should happen within, and the outward change should just organically happen as part of it. The 15th and the 16th verse were about desires. We grow old, we lose our abilities, we lose all these. In spite of that, we hold tight on to our desires. That's something we need to really contemplate on and let go of, is what the 15th and the 16th verses pointed out to us. And the 17th verse that we discussed the last week were about austerities and rituals. How austerities and rituals are significant. They do have an impact on us. They do have a role in our life. But just holding on to the austerities and rituals is meaningless. It's like holding on to all the exercises that we used to do in the first grade or second grade. Rather, we need to graduate, let go of them, get hold of the essence, what they stand for, and move forward. Don't hold on to all the rituals and austerities. That was the 17th verse. Moving on to the 18th verse. 18th verse is about happiness, focusing on the very thing we are all fixated on. Everything that we are fixated on boils down to this very topic, happiness. We all need happiness. So 18th verse is talking about happiness, or trying to throw some light about understanding happiness in depth. So the verse goes as Sura Mandirataru Moola Nivasa Shayya Bhutalam Ajinam Vasa Sarva Parigraha Bhogatyaga Kasya Sukham Na Karoti Viraga. So let's, as always, look into the pronunciation first, word by word, then move on to the meaning, and then the elaboration. Please repeat after me twice. Sura, Sura, Sura. Mandira, Mandira, Mandira. Sura Mandira, Sura Mandira, Sura Mandira. Tairu, Tairu, Tairu. Moola, U with a bar on top of it, so it's a long U. Moola, Moola, Moola. Nivasa, VA has a bar over it, so long A, long A sound. Nivasa, Nivasa, Nivasa. Sura Mandira Taru Moola Nivasa. Next line is Shaya. There are two Y's. Had it been just one Y, it would be Shaya. Because there are two Y's, there's a half Y sound. So Shaya, Shaya, Shaya. Bhutalam, BH, so it is Bha. Bhutalam, and U with a bar over it, so it is a long U. Bhutalam, Bhutalam, Bhutalam. Ajinam, Ajinam, Ajinam. Vasa, Vasa, Vasa. Shayya Bhutalam, Ajinam, Vasa is the second line. The third line, Sarva, Sarva, Sarva. Parigraha, Parigraha, Parigraha. Bhoga, it is again BH, Bha. Bhoga, Bhoga, Bhoga. Tyaga, Tyaga, Tyaga. Sarva parigraha bhoga tyaga. Sarva parigraha bhoga tyaga. Kasya. 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 Sukham. KH. So kha. Sukham. 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 Na. 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 Karoti. 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 Viraga. 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 Kasya sukham na karoti viraga is the fourth line. So the verse altogether is Sura Mandira Taru Moola Nivasa Shayya Bhutalam Ajinam Vasa Sarva Parigraha Bhoga Tyaga Kasya Sukham na Karoti Viraga. So let's chant it or sing it twice in tune as always. If you're not familiar with it, wait for the first time wherein I chant it, and second time you can join me. But if you're familiar, join me both the times. So together. Suramandira Taru Moola Nivasa Shayya Bhutalam Ajinam Vasa Sarva Parigraha Bhoga Tyaga Kasya Sukham na Karoti Viraga. Once more. Sura Mandira Taru Moola Nivasa Shayya Bhutalam Ajinam Vasa Sarva Parigraha Bhoga Tyaga Kasya Sukham na Karoti Viraga. So what does the verse tell us? Sura Mandira. Sura translates to something aspecting to the divine. Sura basically translates to demigods. Mandira, a place of dwelling. Sura Mandira, the place of dwelling of the divine, representing or translating to a place of worship, a temple, so to say. Sura Mandira. Taru, taru, tree. Moola, the very base. Base of what? The base of the tree. Moola, taru moola, the very base of the tree. Nivasa, one who has his or her living right at the base of the tree in a temple. So it's very typical that many who take up to spirituality go to a place of worship, go to a spiritual environment and try to live under a tree, try to live an austere life under a tree. So that's what is pointed out in the first line. Shayya Bhutalam, for such a person, Shayya, for such a person, the bed, the cot that one sleeps on is what? Bhutalam, is verily earth, floor, bare earth, is bed for such a person. Ajinam Vasa, Vasa, clothing, what we wear, the apparel that we wear. And what is the clothing? Ajinam. Ajinam typically translates to animal skin, is representative of just very minimum, very basic, or just as simple as it could be. So just having the minimum in terms of all that we decorate ourselves with, cover ourselves with. So a person who lives an austere life in a place of worship under a tree with just bare floor as the bed and just minimum in terms of clothings. Sarva, all. Parigrah. Parigrah, undertakings or possessions that we have. So things or projects or initiatives that we undertake or possessions that we own. Bhoga, materialistic pleasures. The materialistic pleasures that we get through undertakings that we take up, the endeavors that we venture into, things that we buy and make our own. All those bhogas, all those materialistic pleasures. Tyaga, to let go of it, to renounce. So one who lets go of all the possessions, all the undertakings. Kasya, whose sukham, happiness or just pleasant experience, so to say. Kasya sukham, whose happiness or to whom happiness not karoti, does. To whom does to whom does happiness is not created by whom? Viraga, dispassion. So once there is dispassion, who does not have happiness? Or one who exercises dispassion, how can this person be anything but happy in spite of just minimalistic things at his or her disposal? Is what this verse is pointing out. So summarizing it, the verse says, one who leads an austere life, or one who decides to live, one who consciously leads an austere life, one who decides to be like that, to live choosing a spiritual or a positive environment to be in, to have just bare minimum in terms of materialistic pleasures, like a floor for sleeping, minimal or simple clothings. And then one who has chosen to let go of all the materialistic pleasures in terms of endeavors that he ventures into, in terms of possessions that he buys or she buys, still remains happy. That is the interesting part of it. Still remains happy in spite of none of these so-called materialistic pleasures. So the question remains, one who practices dispassion, how can this person not be happy? Irrespective of what is at his or her disposal, they still remain happy. So the verse is about happiness. If you remember, I shared this experience when we were discussing the Lalita Sahasranama, name 957, Om Dhanyaye Namah, the Divine Mother, who ever bestows blessings, or who is the very embodiment of just blessing and happiness. And we were while we were discussing that name, I was discussing this experience of going to Kedarnath. Kedarnath is one of the most revered places of pilgrimage in northern part of India. And it's up in the Himalayas. I'm not very sure about what is the altitude. It's quite high. If I'm not wrong, 11,000 feet. If I may be wrong, you can definitely Google that. So it's very cold there, of course, in winter. It's in midst of Himalayas. So the typical trend is the temple, the very shrine up there in the top of the mountain opens somewhere around springtime, around March, and then it closes around October. And then there is this huge snow accumulation there, few feet of snow, that the whole temple and the area gets covered under the snow. So I happened to visit this place in October, the month of October, and definitely going from south, most of the time that I've spent in the southern part of India, I was never used to being in cold. And it was around 30, 31, 32 degrees, 0 degrees Celsius or 32 degrees Fahrenheit. And I had all these 3 or 4 layers, and I was advised to wear 2 gloves, 2 socks, 2-3 layers of warm clothing, etc. And I was at the temple, and then as we were approaching the temple, there are these shops and little, eateries, etc. on the way. So you trek up the hill typically. You go up 14 kilometers. That's about 6 or 7 miles, if I'm not wrong. And you go walking, or you go on a on a mule typically, or a pony. And lot many places the path is so narrow that you're just going by the cliff. You can just see down the big abyss down there. One wrong step, you get liberation. But so you just go up, and you go up the temple. So as you reach the shrine, there are a lot many little stores, and there was this man sitting there with just one little towel around his waist. Here people are all decked up in layers to remain warm, and this person is there just with a piece of towel around his waist. He was drinking some chai, and then later I saw him walking around the temple, just continuously walking around the temple. We had a small program in the temple, and all throughout this person is just walking around the temple. Eventually, definitely in the beginning, he looked like a beggar, a homeless person. Definitely it was clear he is not a homeless person, because you need something to be like that in that weather. So I just went up to talk to him, as I had discussed during the Lalita Sahasranama, and he told me he just lives there all throughout the year. So I was asking him, so once the temple closes, the whole town is abandoned, everyone goes down to a lower altitude, the worship happens there, so you also must be going there. He said, no, I just spend all 12 months right here. Even if it is snow, I'm just here. It's just fun. It's so much fun when none of these distractions are there as part of whatever happens here. And he just spends there all his life, whether it is snow or otherwise. And with just bare minimum things, or not even bare minimum things that we could think of, he just lives happily. And he was mentioning, just Anand hai. Anand, everything is just Anand for him. Everything is just joy for him, because he says, he was mentioning, I have no house to be looted, and I have no money to be stolen. Then what should I worry about? And that is the point this verse is talking about. It's talking about when we consciously decide these things around me are the ones giving me happiness, what is there for me to worry about? I just remember just a few days ago, I had a group call, a meeting, wherein one person was talking about how the person couldn't finish the task that the person was supposed to finish. And the person said, oh, I unexpectedly had an accident. I had a cracked screen. And everyone in the call went, oh, that's so sad, you have a cracked screen. Including me. Even I was mentioning, oh, that's so sad, you have a cracked screen. So the person's phone screen just shattered. But then I was thinking about, say, just go 15 years back or 20 years back. There was no concept called cracked screen. This is something that we defined. We got smartphones and we defined that cracked screen is a problem. And now we are sympathizing with our own self or someone else that we know, telling, oh my God, you have a cracked screen. So who invented or who defined that problem? We. So it's very clear that we define the problems that we face, or we define the happiness that we need to experience on the other side. So talking about happiness, happiness is the common denominator of every pursuit that we go in, everything that we deal with. Everyone wants to be happy. Whatever we do or whatever we don't, we want to be happy. We do it or we don't do it so that we remain happy, right? It's very obvious. For someone, flying around the world, visiting all across the world is happiness. For someone else, not flying is happiness. So happiness is what we define. For someone, hanging out with friends and many people is happiness. For someone else, seclusion gives happiness. So we define what is happiness. But our pursuit is always after happiness. The deeds that we do, the good deeds that we do, the ill deeds that we do is all finally what? To make us feel happy, whether we realize it or not. We do even little things, say insignificant things to big things, significant things that we do it to feel happy. whether we realize it or not. It is for that. For that matter, Amma tells the ashram monks, the renunciates in the ashram, telling even you who seem to have renounced everything or who have taken up the vow of renouncing everything, even you have come here for happiness. Probably the happiness is of a different kind here. You're trying to find happiness devoid of the materialistic pleasure. But still, even you are here in terms of finding happiness. Living in Amritapuri is very interesting. A room that would be half of the size of this hall in MA Center DC. If you have visited MA Center DC, the prayer hall that we have, it would be half the size of this room. And if you remember hearing my talk from Amritapuri on January 1st this year, and I was talking about living in the second floor dormitory, the second floor brahmachari's room or the Swami's room. And this room, size of half of probably 2/3 of this hall in Washington, D.C., there were 27 people sharing that place. But I should say everyone was very happy just being there. Or there are rooms, smaller rooms like, again, if you have visited the Washington, D.C. ashram, there's a small pantry room, the kitchen pantry room. So the size of that room is shared by 2, 3, sometimes 4 people. And even they live just very happily. So, like Amma was pointing about, though you're trying to be devoid of the materialistic pleasure, you're still trying to find happiness in that. So the pursuit is always after happiness. So even these rooms, that we live in, we cannot permanently call it ours, or we cannot mark our territory there, because there is a big event in Amritapuri, especially Amma's birthday. You are expected to just vacate that room for the devotees who come and accommodate them. Where do you live? Suramandira Tarumula Nivasa. In a spiritual place, live under a tree. That's the best. Or live under the stage. Some people find the big stage that we set up for Amma program under the stage a very cozy place. So many people just stay under that. It's just fun. It may seem like, oh my God, life in Amritapuri is not pleasant at all. I would underscore the point that it is very pleasant in spite of all this. And that's the very point that this verse is trying to make. That everything is so pleasant there. Everything would be very pleasant when you consciously just let go. And that happiness is much, much, much superior than the so-called ephemeral happiness that we try to find in things and people. Of course, not that we are all realized people who live in Amritapuri. Amma says, you've definitely, when Amma says this, she doesn't want to boost our ego, and she would say, of course, you've not renounced completely. You're not complete renouncers yet. And I would totally agree with that. I do have a smartphone. I do have a computer in front of me. I may be able to live without a wife, but I definitely may find it difficult to live without a Wi-Fi. So wife is fine, but Wi-Fi, I may have to think about it. I have to test it. I have to test myself without Wi-Fi. How does it go? I can do it. I do take the vow of not completely shutting off for a day, but how does it work when it is for many days is yet to be tested. So like Amma says, we are not complete renouncers. We are trying to be there. But again, the point I was trying to make is Suramandira Tarumula Nivasa, Shayya Bhutalam Ajinam Vasa. The points made there. We can see that example in Amritapuri too. For all the ashram residents, many people who have been living in a mansion here, who have been living in a 5-bedroom house, and they go there, all of them are living in a small room. I would say, again, the size of, I would say, for about how many square feet? You think it would be about 300 to 400 200 square feet, and 4 people are living there in that room. They go from the US and live there. Definitely that takes a lot of guts. It takes a lot of determination to live like that. So happiness, coming back to the point, happiness is a state of mind. It's not something that comes from outside the things and people. Rather, it is something that is within, that we just tap into, like Amma says. There can be no one in the world who could be pointed out as the happiest person. Even the richest person has days where he is extremely or she is extremely sad. Even the poorest person has days where he or she is extremely happy. I have given this example of the big fat wedding that happens in India. The rich people have it really, really big fat in nature. And the poor people may not have it as expensive as it may be, but in their mind, it is still a big fat wedding. We typically have this in North India, we have this system or this process as part of a wedding, which we call Bharat, wherein you have a procession, the groom sits on a horse, and all the relatives, friends, they're all dancing around him. They go on a procession from one point, typically the groom's house, to the wedding venue. And people are just rejoicing. In a rich wedding, you would see the horse all decorated with expensive ornaments. The groom is all decked up with expensive ornaments. The relatives are all wearing expensive clothes, branded clothes. And, the band, the music band that's playing music is all like hi-fi, with all hi-fi gadgets or hi-fi instruments that they have. And everyone's dancing. And you look at the same Bharat with respect to a poor person. The horse may not be decked up with as many expensive ornaments, neither would the groom be, nor the relatives be, and may not be the best or expensive band that is playing the music. But the dance that happens is literally the same. Whether you're dressed up in expensive clothes or whether it's just as much as you could afford, the happiness that is expressed as part of the dance or the joy during that procession is just equal. So happiness is what they decided to have, rather in spite of what was at their disposal. A good example of this very message that this verse is trying to point out to us. I was watching a YouTube video. Someone shared with me about people expressing happiness. And there was this person in the video wherein it was disclosed to the person that the lottery ticket that he was holding won him a few $1 million. And this person just couldn't contain his happiness. He was just going crazy. His eyes were just bulging out of his face, and he was just screaming, going round and round and round and round, just totally unable to contain his happiness. And as part of the same video, there was another little child who was woken up from his sleep and brought down to the living room of the house on the Christmas morning, and right next to the Christmas tree there's a small gift, and he just gets so excited, tears open, and it's some Lego or some such. And this little kid goes as crazy as the other person. A Lego box would be what? $200, $100, $50? Nothing equal to a few $1 million that the other person won. And their reaction is literally the same. The level of happiness is literally the same. So what is the point that we are coming to? Happiness is what we define. I will be happy if I get a box of Lego, or I could be happy if I get $1 million, or I would be only happy if I get $20 million, or I would be happy only if I become a billionaire. All these are definitions made by us, and we become happy accordingly. So happiness is defined by us. Again, the example that I've discussed before about who wants to be a millionaire. This was the Indian version that I watched. Kaun banega karodpati? Who wants to be a millionaire? And in this, what happened, a person who went through, out of the 15 questions, went through about 8 or 9 and won about 25 lakhs, which is about 250 million rupees. And the person left very happy. He made money, though he didn't reach the 15th question. Another person who reached the 14th question and then answered the 15th question wrong came back to earning more than what the other person earned, but still left unhappy. Because the person who answered wrong actually got the 250 million rupees. The other person, I think, got about 10 million rupees or some such. I don't exactly remember the number. So the one who got the smaller number left happy because his side was at that number. He got it, he left, he was happy. The other person who reached the 15th question and answered it wrong had his sight on the 10 million rupees, which he just couldn't make. So he came down to a smaller number, which was much bigger than the other person earned, but he left unhappy. Doesn't it make sense? Or it doesn't make sense. One who earned more left unhappy. One who earned less left much happier. Again, coming back to the point that happiness is what we define, and we then get contained in that framework or that model that we define. I was just mentioning a little while ago, it's very difficult to say that such and such person is the happiest person in the world. But if we really Google the happiest person in the world, more or invariably there is this one particular name that would pop up. The name of a Buddhist monk called Matthew Richard. I think he is in France, if I'm not wrong. Luckily, it's a monk. So it makes a lot of sense, goes with our discussion. Whether he's the happiest person or not is debatable. People may agree, people may not agree, people may have different ways of looking at it. I would say Amma is the happiest person. Very confidently say that. But then, the whole point of the study that scientists made, based on which they came up with this conclusion that he's the happiest person in the world, is not because he has a lot of possessions. Rather, the study mentioned that he is the happiest person because he is happy without owning anything. Happy being a monk. Happy being an austere person, a person who leads an austere life. And Matthew Richard, in an interview, he was asked, "How are you happy? What makes you happy?" And he says, "I am happy because I know where to look for happiness." And he says, look for happiness within and not in things and people around. And that's verily the point that we are discussing. It's like the story that I've shared again. Many of these stories, they're worth sharing again. About this person who's driving in an isolated highway and his car breaks down and he's unable to start the car, and he looks around. At a distance, he finds a small light and he goes up. Lo and behold, it's a mechanic shop. He's so happy, but it's a completely worn out, old style mechanic shop. And there's this old man sitting there, and he asks him, "What happened?" He says, "My car doesn't start. It just stalled all of a sudden. Can you help me?" He says, "Why not?" And he just takes a very small kit, and this person has no confidence he can fix it with just the small kit. And the old man comes around the car, just walks around the car, looks at the car, puts his ear against the car here and there, opens the hood, again puts his ear like a doctor, takes a stethoscope, and is looking around. And this person really has no confidence that he can fix the car. And finally, he puts his ear against one part of the engine and then places his hand there, takes a hammer, just taps on that part, just slowly. Lo and behold, the car starts. He says, "The car is fixed. Carry on with your journey." And he's surprised, just with a tap, he could fix the car. And then he asks him, how much do I owe you? He says, you owe me $1,000. He says, what do you mean $1,000 just for tapping the car? $1,000 no way reasonable. He says, oh, for tapping the car or tapping on that part of the car is just $1. $999 to know where to tap. So to know where to tap is more important or most important than the tapping. Similarly, to know where to tap for happiness is most important. Even with surgeons, I've heard the big shot surgeons, they aren't in the operation room right from the beginning. It's all the junior surgeons and the nurse who cut open the body, get everything ready and have the organ quite visible or taken out of, right? And the surgeon just comes, does the little things and just leaves. And he gets paid the most, though the others do the most of the hard work. Why? The same point. He knows exactly what to do, and that is most valuable than the other hard work that is being done. So happiness, the most important thing is know where we need to tap. So happiness, like the verse points out, letting go of all the so-called materialistic pleasure, one still remains happy. How? By understanding that happiness is not in these things around me, rather, happiness is devoid of these things. So happiness is not based on what I have. Rather, happiness is based on how much more I want. The more my wants are, the less happy I'm going to be. So it's not that, so equating happiness with how much we own is meaningless. But equating happiness with how much I want more is what we need to look at. Even if we have $1 million in our bank account, but we crave for $1 billion, we would be less happy. Whereas, even if we have just $1,000 in our bank account and we are happy with it, we are better happy. Like the example of who wants to be a millionaire. The one who left with bigger amount was less happy because his craving, his sight was upon a bigger number. So the more that we crave for, less we would be happy. The more we own or less we own is just insignificant. Like this verse is pointing out. Say we have a lot doesn't mean you will be unhappy. Being rich is not meaningless. Being rich, having all the comforts is not bad. You earned it, you enjoy it. There's nothing wrong in that. But will that person be happy? Depends on whether he wants more. Whether so you could be rich and still be happy if you don't want more. And if you could be sad if you have everything but you want more. Similarly with poor people too. If you are poor and you want more and not be poor, we will not be happy. But if we are happy with whatever we have, we will be happy. So it goes with both the conditions with rich or poor. So just being rich is bad. Let's take that stereotype out. It is very typical that the more we earn, the more we want. It's a typical trend. That's why we say, Amma gives the example how a person lives in an air-conditioned room and commits suicide, whereas someone else who's living on the roadside, on the walkway, just sleeps peacefully. Or like the monk in the Kedarnath temple, he just lives and sleeps peacefully because he says he has no fear of his house getting looted. He has no fear of his money getting stolen. So, like Amma says, happiness is a decision that we make every moment of our life. We could be happy every moment of our life if we decide to be happy every moment of our life. Amma says, if we decide to be happy, no one or nothing can make us sad. If we decide to be sad, nothing or no one can make us happy. Things or people around can catalyze the process, but still we have to make the decision that I want to be happy. So it's not that something that we get that makes us happy. Rather, it's that I don't want anything. That is happiness. So happiness is not what I get. Happiness is I don't want anything. That is what is happiness. So happiness is not about getting things. Happiness is not wanting things. That is finally what happiness is. And that's verily the point the first 3 lines of this verse talks about. Living an austere life in a temple under a tree, just with bare minimum comforts, letting go of all the materialistic pleasures. When you have viraga, when you have dispassion, who cannot be happy once he or she develops viraga, vairagya? Once you develop dispassion, how can you not be happy? You can only be happy, whether you are in riches or you are in the most frugal or austere setup, you would still be happy. So that's the point this verse is trying to convey to us. So we have a little more than 10 minutes left, so we'll quickly chant all the 18 verses that we have discussed till now and then conclude praying for world peace. So let's all together chant it in the tune, slowly paying attention to the pronunciation as we had discussed. And in case you're not interested or you find it difficult to chant, you can just focus on the meaning and reflect on the meaning that we have discussed of all the verses. So 18 verses together. Let's start. Bhaja Govindam, Bhaja Govindam, Govindam Bhaja Mudhamate, Samprapte Sannihite Kale, Nahi Nahi Rakshate Dukranya Karane. Moodha jahihi dhanagama trishna kuru sadbuddhim manasi vitrishna yallabhase nija karmopatam vittam tena vinodaya chittam. Naristana bhaira nabhidesham drishtva maga mohavesham etan mamsa vasadi vikaram manasi vichintaya varam varam. Nalini dalagata jalamati taralam tadvajivitam atishaya chapalam vidhi vyadhyabhimana krastam lokam shoka hatam cha samastam yavad vit Toparjana sakta tavan nija parivaro rakta paschat चाजीवति जर्जरदेहे वार्ता कोऽपि न पृच्छति गेः यावत् पवनो निवसति देहे तावत् पृच्छति कुशलं गेहे गतवति वायौ देहापाये भार्या बिभ्यति तस्मिन् काये बालस्तावत् क्रीडासक्तः तरुणस्तावत् तरुणीसक्तः वृद्धस्तावत् चिन्तासक्तः परमे ब्रह्मणि कोऽपि न सक्तः काते कान्ता कस्ते पुत्रः संसारोऽयम् अतीव विचित्रः कस्य त्वं कः कुत आयातः तत्त्वं चिन्तय तद् इह भ्रातः सत्सङ्गत्वे निस्सङ्गत्वं निस्सङ्गत्वे निर्मोहत्वं निर्मोहत्वे निश्चलतत्त्वं निश्चलतत्त्वे जीवन्मुक्तिः वयसि गते कः कामविकारः शुष्के नीरे कः कासारः क्षीणे वित्ते कः परिवारः ज्ञाते तत्त्वे कः संसारः मा कुरु धनजन यौवनगर्वं हरति निमेषात् कालः सर्वं मायामयमिदम् अखिलं हित्वा ब्रह्मपदं त्वं प्रविश विदित्वा दीनयामिन्यौ सायं प्रातः शिशिरवसन्तौ पुनरायातः कालः क्रीडति गच्छत्यायुः तदपि न मुञ्चति आशावायुः काते कान्ता धनगतचिन्ता वातुलकिं तव नास्ति नियन्ता त्रिजगति सज्जन संगतिरेका भवति भवार्णव तरणे नौका जटिलो मुण्डि लुञ्चितकेशः काषायाम्बर बहुकृतवेषः पश्यन्नपि च न पश्यति मूढः उदरनिमित्तं बहुकृतवेषः अङ्गं गलितं पलितं मुण्डं दशनविहीनं जातं तुण्डं वृद्धो याति गृहीत्वा दण्डं तदपि न मुञ्चति आशापिण्डम् अग्रे वह्निः पृष्ठे भानु रात्रौ चुबुक समर्पितजानुः करतलभिक्षस्तरुतलवासः तदपि न मुञ्चति आशापाशः कुरुते गङ्गा सागरगमनं व्रतपरिपालनम् अथवा दानं ज्ञानविहीनः सर्वमतेन भजति न मुक्तिं जन्मशतेन सुरमन्दिरतरुमूलनिवासः शय्याभूतलम् अजिनं वासः सर्वपरिग्रह भोगत्यागः कस्य सुखं न करोति विरागः. Let us conclude sincerely praying to the Almighty that every being in the creation is happy, content and peaceful. Let us all chant the Shanti mantra together 3 times. Om Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu. Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu. Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namah. Hari Om.